Indian rockets are cheap on a per kilogram basis, and the reason is that they have low labour costs, and so that they can actually compete successfully against higher labour costs in places like America and Europe.
And there's a big market for this, I assume.
There's a growing market. New constellations of low Earth orbit satellites are being proposed that could amount to hundreds or even thousands of satellites. So India would be wise, is thinking itself wise to get into that market.
And what are these satellites actually for? Once they're up there, what are they doing for us?
Well, the satellites carried on this particular launch, 88 of them were sort of Earth observation satellites that were going to provide looking down at the Earth with Earth observation on a regular basis. And some of the satellites were doing asset tracking and some ship tracking, and there's also science satellites aboard. So there was
a mix of different things.
But the key thing to remember about this launch was the main payload was actually an Indian Earth observation and mapping satellite called Cartosat. The others were very small satellites called CubeSats, only about 4 or 5 kilograms each.
So they must be tiny then.
They're very small, but that's why. But India had the main payload, and they thought, well, we've got some spare payload capacity. We'll carry up some commercial satellites aboard. And
but all these tiny satellites floating around in orbit, aren't they going to just add to the load of space junk we have up there already?
The answer is yes. In that particular orbit, it's a polar orbit, and it takes quite a long time for the satellites to come down. So that one man's CubeSats are another man's space debris. So
they're quite low. The smaller the satellite, the lower they are in orbit, so to speak.
Well, these satellites are in a low Earth orbit, but it's not low enough for the self-cleansing action of the Earth's atmosphere to remove them. So they will take some time to come down. Maybe tens of years to come down.
India is doing really well, obviously, in the space race. Who are its main rivals, and is it able to compete with the big guys?
Commercially, the main rivals are places like America, with people like SpaceX and its Falcon rocket, and Europe, you've got Arianespace. But on a geopolitical front, China is its major rival.
China, and in what sense? I mean, are they actually competing properly together?
They're not competing commercially, but they're competing on the big launches to places like Mars. I mean, India reached Mars before China, for example, with a spacecraft. So whereas China was ahead of India in getting spacecraft around the moon. So there's a little competition going on there.
Now, some might argue that a country with the amount of poverty that India has shouldn't be spending that much money on a space program. What's India's argument to counter that?
I think that there's some strong arguments to have a space program for India. For example, the Earth observation satellites can help the farming and agriculture, and the communication satellites that can be carried can help the remote internet access to remote areas. There is an argument against India having a manned program. That's not the plan
then, a manned program?
They would like to have a manned space program, and they are looking at further long-range interplanetary programs. Those don't really help the Indian poor.
Okay, well, interesting argument, David. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And that's a round of business from me, Lucy. Back to you.
Miriam, thank you so much. Now, we have a unique